Good afternoon and welcome to the data protection complaints, the what, the so what and what's next. If you've made it this far, then well done to you in this heat. I'm absolutely sweating. So my name is Victoria Swift and I'm joined by my colleagues Helen Raftery and Dom Smith. So between us, we have around 50 years experience working in the public advice and data protection complaints department. So I think we've well and truly earned our stripes to be able to come speak to you all today. So what are we going to talk about? Well, to begin with, I'm going to cover the what of data protection complaints by taking a look at the types of complaints we've received over the last year and what that tells us. I'm then going to hand over to Helen for the so what. Why is this important? And Helen will then go on to talk a little bit about the DP reforms and what that might mean for complaint handling. Well, I don't want to give away any spoilers. One of the changes is around organisations needing to have a complaint process in place. So Dom will end the presentation by talking to you about the characteristics of good complaint handling and what you might need to do to put in place to meet this requirement. We expect that there will be time at the end to answer some of your questions, but we don't expect to be able to answer all of them given the time restraints. So if you have any questions, please just pop them into the chat. Our colleague Graham Brown is sat behind the scenes and he's charged with getting us to answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. So let's get started and take a look at those numbers. You can see that we've been busy handling 39,098 complaints and 6,422 inquiries from the general public about their data protection rights. The chart provides a breakdown of the sector areas we get the most complaints about. So you can see that finance, insurance and credit, along with land and property services, are the highest, with religious organisations generating very few complaints. It may help to explain that we receive a significant number of complaints that relate to the use of domestic CCTV. These complaints are recorded under land or property services, so this explains a high volume of complaints in that area. We'll be sending out the slides after the session in case you want a closer look to see how your sector compares to the others. But what are these complaints about, and where do we see organisations tripping up the most? We get quite a similar spread of complaints across all the sectors, and so have combined the data together in this table to give you an idea of what we've been dealing with. Along the bottom are the main categories of complaints we receive. So complaints about right of access, right to erasure, through to the right of data portability on the right-hand side. We've also colour-coded the graph so you can get an idea of the proportion of complaints we uphold. The red indicates those complaints that we've upheld, where there was more work for the organisation to do, and the green represents where we've not upheld the complaint. So straight away you can see that the majority of the complaints we receive are from people who are unhappy about how their subject access request has been responded to, or in some cases not responded to. And I think this shows how important this individual right is to people. You can see that over half the complaints are not upheld. So sometimes people don't understand what information they are entitled to, and they come to us for clarity. Even if an organisation has done nothing wrong, but we can see that a more detailed explanation could have avoided them contacting the ICO, we will provide advice on how they could improve their responses for the future. We've produced some helpful guidance that is available on our website about how organisations can better deal with these requests, and I would strongly recommend that you check it out. The next highest number of complaints we receive relate to the right to erasure. Many of these are about internet search results and requests for information to be taken down. In many of these cases, we don't support the removal of the links and the complaint is not upheld. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what we see, and I'll now hand you over to Helen.
Thanks, Victoria. Let's spend a little time now talking about the so what. Why does all this matter? And why should you be interested in the types of complaints we deal with? I'm guessing that most of you are interested as you've shown up for the presentation, so that's a good start. I do think it's helpful for you to see where organisations can get it wrong, so you can go back to your own organisations, take a look at your procedures and how you do things, and strengthen them if you need to so that you don't make the same mistakes. For me, what's important here is that these statistics represent people, who have complained that the law's been broken and who are asking for help to enforce their rights. It matters to them, their relationships, and the trust they have in you as DPOs and the organisations that hold their personal data. It's about people, of course, and making sure that we do right by them, and that's important. All right, let me get off my soapbox for a minute and hand over to the real experts, my colleagues on the coalface who handle these complaints every day. I'm going to play a clip now that will give you an insight into the work we do and some of the improvements that organisations have made because of it, and how these in turn have helped people. I hope you enjoy the clips.
The organisation Sophia and myself are talking about today relies heavily on volunteers. Because of the nature of the business, they not necessarily have the large organisation communication structures. They did not have appropriate data protection procedures to respond to data protection complaints and concerns. That resulted in this particular complaint being unanswered for over 1 calendar month, which the legislation allowed them. When we received the complaint, we obviously checked which part of the legislation it applies to, and we sent a letter to this organization advising them of how they could improve their data protection procedures, but also making them aware that this complaint was unanswered and they now have to respond to it. And when this organization reviewed the data protection procedures, they realized that they have a wider issue within the network of communication and how the volunteers' data is being processed. And they've improved in a way that they've set up a task group specifically to consider and to manage the volunteers' data. They've also applied for the Information Commission's Office audit, which will be an assessment to whether the organisation is following good data practice. In the meantime, they also established a data protection champion network to include volunteer representation, and that will allow for the communication channel across volunteers and make them aware of the data protection entitlements and rights. And Sophia will tell you what the data protection champion network does.
Thank you, Hannah. So the Data Protection Champion Network is a good initiative because it pools all the specialists in one defined group within the organisation. Also, it puts a face to data protection, a human face, more importantly, both for volunteers working there, but also for the public for when they get in touch with the organisation. Other initiatives that organisations could apply are, for example, commissioning a creative agency to work with them on their content and specifically privacy policy wording and any other public-facing data protection materials, as well as perhaps working with web designers to make sure that all links are working, all pages are working, and there's specifically a data protection contact people can get in touch with, and they don't have to go through the whole website to find them.
This case study demonstrates how the resolution of a data protection complaint can involve instigating a connection between similar organisations and facilitating the sharing of good practices between them, allowing organisations to learn from each other. We identified a number of complaints regarding the security of information with the local council. After meeting with the council, we discovered that the situation was being exacerbated by the council's subject access request backlog. We worked with the council to develop a recovery plan. This involved holding regular meetings with the council and installing a single point of contact within the ICO complaints department. This allowed us to have an ongoing dialogue with the council, including being able to resolve complaints quickly over the phone. George will provide further details about this case.
Thank you, Louise. An example of this involved giving prompt practical advice about how to address individuals refusing to provide identification when making a subject access request. We encourage the council to start a conversation with their customers, which results in more transparency and allow the council to bring a number of requests to a quick and satisfactory conclusion. In addition to this, we also connected the council with other local authorities who had experienced and recovered from similar issues. This enabled the councils to share previous experiences to improve their own information rights practices. Collaborating with organisations in your field to start a conversation about the regular sharing of good practice can enable you to improve your own practices and benefit from other practices across the sector. We strongly encourage you to explore collaborating with similar organisations in your own field to enable you to strengthen each other's information rights practices through the sharing of lessons learned, difficulties overcome and solutions found when implementing sector-specific data protection.
So in this case, an individual raised a complaint about a retail organisation failing to comply with their right to object to direct marketing requests and their right to erasure. We had several similar complaints about the same organisation. Because the organisation either failed to respond appropriately or listen to their customer, some of the complainants then submitted a SAR as they were concerned about what other data the organisation held on them. So effectively, the problem snowballed. Initially, we referred the issue back to the organisation under the accountability principle, offering them guidance and advice. Whilst the organisation did then respond to the complainant, in some cases, they still only provided brief responses, generic responses, or they didn't fully address the complainant's issues. This resulted in the individual writing back to us having to write out to the organisation again, so lots of unnecessary emails. As a result, I called the data protection officer to open up dialogue, explain what we needed from them. We asked them to not only deal with the queries relating to the individual's request, but also to provide a more comprehensive response about their policies and procedures for dealing with direct marketing and erasure in order to fully resolve the issue. My colleague Karen will now talk about the outcomes and next steps.
Thank you, Alison. So upon review, the organisation accepted that changes to their policies were required to improve their customer experience. They properly engaged with the customer to explain the processing in detail, and they clarified what steps they'll be taking to improve their customer service going forward. Improvements included promptly acknowledging complaints, providing thorough responses, making the privacy policy more accessible, and also including appropriate contact details in the privacy policy to avoid delays. Improving their customer service enabled the individual to develop trust in how their personal data was being used, and it also played a part in the overall confidence of the organisation's practices. It led to the resolution of the concerns, and it also stopped further requests being made from this specific individual. Going forward, a focus on customer service and clear communication can decrease the risk of data protection complaints, and it can also prevent ICO involvement. It is very important an organisation does take the time to ensure that they are responding to complaints promptly and as much detail as possible. Certain issues may come up more than once, and not all individuals will understand the data protection terminology being used, and so it is important that you do work with your customer. This may involve providing more than one explanation, or perhaps explaining your processes in detail but simple terms. It is also worth mentioning that whilst requests are purpose blind, this doesn't necessarily mean you have to be blind to the fact that there may be a purpose. Picking up the phone to enter dialogue and working with your customer promptly, whilst also understanding that as an organisation you do need to adhere to the law, can decrease the risk of further complaints. Picking up the phone can really help to humanise matters and improve the customer experience and build rapport.
Okay. I think you'll agree that they're a great bunch, and you may have had some dealings with one or two of them already. I hope that you managed to get some takeaways from what they were saying. And the main thing that stood out for me was providing that good customer service, communication, and keeping in touch. Some food for thought maybe, but let's now turn to the juicy bit and chat about what's next. So, what's next for complaints? For those that aren't entirely up to speed, the government has responded to recommendations made around reforming the data protection regime. The response does include some implications for how we look at complaints and what we might expect from data controllers and from individuals in the future. As far as we are concerned, most of the changes that are coming should be proportionate and build on the work we've been trying to do already. They should encourage trust and understanding between data subjects and controllers, individuals and organisations, so that everyone can do things better. So, why change? Well, the current legislation forces us to consider every complaint made to us, regardless of where it's up to or what it looks like. We've shared information about the number of cases that we have to manage, and it's right that we do that. But it's also true that we have to dedicate a huge amount of resource to handling data protection complaints, and many cases can and are resolved more effectively by your intervention without the need for us to step in. So, the new proposals aim to create a more efficient and effective model that would require a complainant to attempt to resolve their complaint directly with the relevant data controller before lodging a complaint with the ICO. At the moment, we strongly encourage that to happen because it's a good idea for all concerned. But at the moment, it isn't a formal requirement. In the future, it is going to be. So many thousands of complaints come to us too early, and there's not much value for either party if we turn people away, often after they've waited for our busy case office to share that message with them. So we hope that by being a bit clearer up front, people will know what to expect and what to do before reporting organisations to the regulator, because that's what they're doing when they're making complaints to us. Of course, to make this journey work for the individuals, there has to be a willingness for the organisation to want to and to be able to deal with complaints about data protection issues. What this means for you is that there will be a formal requirement to have a simple and transparent complaint handling process in place to deal with data subject complaints. Now, for the vast majority of you, this isn't going to be an issue. You'll have that in place already. We're also looking to produce some guidance about what a good complaints handling process might look like and what's expected. We want to help support you, provide hints and tips so that everyone can resolve as many issues as possible without escalation. This might mean more dialogue to avoid disputes and conversation to avoid conflict. We also recognise that those without formal complaint processes are likely to be the smaller or newer organisations, and we want to make sure that anything that we put in place is proportionate and manageable. Now, there's also the intention to slightly tweak some of the criteria for refusing to deal with complaints that are vexatious or excessive. Now, I appreciate that on hearing that, many of you are going to want to know exactly what that means in practical terms, and we will work to provide some clarity around that too, so that we all understand the sorts of matters that won't be investigated. The aim is to be a bit clearer with everyone about what will and won't get full consideration. But look, we don't expect this to be a wholesale change that affects lots of individuals. It should be a way to set out expectations more clearly for everyone, and we'll still be very much on hand to provide help, assistance and guidance for members of the public who have concerns that they want to raise, and of course for organisations that want to do the best to protect people and their personal information. So there's going to be more to share about what we are doing with our complaints work, informally through our website, blogs, social media contact and other communication channels, as well as formally through consultations on any of the more comprehensive pieces of guidance that we might put together. We really look forward to hearing from you about any changes that we intend to make and how we can be most effective. But we also really do see this as being collaborative, with you being key players in the end-to-end complaints journey for individuals. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Dom now to talk a little bit about complaint procedures. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. So yeah, I wanted to kick things off really by saying that most of you are actually getting things right. You've got mechanisms in place and you're championing good data protection practice within your organisations, and that's really great to see. We do also understand that there's a story behind every complaint, and we're aware that often the complainant will already be known to you, and that we're aware that there's often underlying issues such as other customer service concerns that are there. As Helen's touched on, one of the proposed changes is that there's going to be a formal requirement, however, to have a simple and transparent complaints handling process in place in order to deal with complaints. And so what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about what this could potentially look like within your organisation. We want you to continue to get things right and to improve your processes if that's possible. Your complaint processes should be clear and straightforward and readily accessible, and they should be well managed throughout so that decisions are taken quickly, things put back where necessary, and of course, lessons learned. It's very much explanation, not escalation. So you might want to grab a pen and jot these down. Hopefully there'll be things that you've already doing and already have in place, and there might be a few other tips that you can pick up along the way where you can perhaps improve things. So we'll start off with the first point. It's all about being in good time. A timely acknowledgement of a complaint is a must to show that you are taking the complaint seriously. We'd suggest 14 calendar days if that's possible. You should be clear and upfront about how long it's going to take to look into a complaint, and you should commit to providing regular updates, particularly if it is going to take a little bit longer. You should aim to provide that response within a month. If you can't, then again, that's where the updates are really, really important. In the most complex cases, we would expect that an investigation into a complaint isn't taking any longer than 3 calendar months. If you are taking longer, then this obviously may mean that you infringe the accountability principle within the legislation. So next, it's really important to listen and understand. A key part of your complaints process needs to be focused on understanding the complaint. If you don't get to the heart of the complaint being raised, you won't be able to fully resolve it, and that's where it's likely that it will end up coming to us. We sometimes receive complaint letters which are very long and detailed, and it can be quite difficult to identify what specifically the problem is. So if you receive a complaint like this, it can be really, really useful to just pick up the phone, speak to the customer or the service user or the data subject, whoever it is that is contacting you, and find out what it is that's most important to them. Once you have a good understanding of the main issues, you can then start to address them. So in cases like this, it's sometimes helpful just to get the complainant to agree the scope of the complaint before you start investigating, so everyone is clear what is being looked into. One way of perhaps doing this is potentially through a point of contact, and having that single point of contact will hopefully prevent complaints going unanswered due to a lack of ownership. If you don't have a data protection officer, consider involving someone else early in the process. Where possible, complaints should be investigated by someone not involved in the events leading up to them, ideally a data protection team or a data protection officer. And this is where the data protection champions, which our case officers referred to, can come in really handy. If you've got people across the organisation who understand data protection and can signpost things to the data protection officer, hopefully that means that complaints don't slip through the net and come straight through to us. Then use plain language. It's a really basic one, but I think as data protection experts, we all fall into the trap of using jargon and complex language, and that can be a real barrier to complaints. So remember, this is also a really important opportunity for you to learn from the complaints that you receive, and removing barriers such as that jargon can be really, really helpful. And of course, be accessible. So the complaints process should be accessible to all people, including vulnerable customers and service users, and those who need reasonable adjustments. Those individuals who may not fully understand their rights or fully understand the implications, and it's really important that everything's accessible to those individuals. So you should be contactable by email, phone, letter, and any other processes that you might have available on your website, and any other communication methods. If a service user or customer makes you aware that they're having difficulties raising a complaint, then the onus should be on you to try and offer that help and try and help them understand that. And again, I know this is something that lots of you are doing. So if we move on then, tell it straight. Don't overcomplicate the process. Make sure you give individuals an opportunity for review if your organisation is large, but you don't need too many hoops for individuals to jump through. You don't want them having to go through too many processes. Try and make it straightforward for individuals. Looking at an overly complicated complaints process can put people off, and that's obviously not what it's all about. It's about making individuals understand their rights and how they can access them, and you helping them understand that. When you set out the complaint, it's really important that you share your findings. So you should set out what you have investigated and what you have found. You need to include quite a bit of detail to ensure the individual understands how you have reached your conclusion, where necessary and where appropriate, and again, really helping them understand that. Your communication here needs to be clear and, where possible, neutral in tone. It can also be useful to use, basic things like bullet points, so that the complaint areas and so you can respond to each point and provide the evidence where possible. And then, of course, you can be looking to put things right. So it's important to be honest. If you've found that things have gone wrong, be clear about this and explain what will be done as a result, and acknowledge that something has gone wrong as early as possible. An early apology can go a long way into resolving issues, and that ownership of something going wrong can be really, really powerful. And then learn from that, of course. So the process doesn't end with the final response. Is there anything you can learn from or improve on going forwards? If you routinely see a lot of complaints in similar areas, a really small change or slight tweak in your process could make a real difference here. So definitely look to do that. And as you get towards the end of the process, and even early on, there might be times when you can signpost individuals. So if you're unable to resolve the complaint to the complainant's satisfaction, obviously inform them that they can bring their complaint to the ICO. Or if you can see that they are looking to seek something like compensation and you think that there's a better remedy and going down the legal route would be a better option for them, you can advise them to go to court. You can signpost them to those other avenues as well. So they don't always have to come to the ICO if you can see what they're specifically looking for. And then I guess on a final point, it's just having good complaints handling can be really positive for service providers. Dealing with complaints effectively will give your customers and service users that confidence that your customer and service user focused. An effective complaints procedure can also help you learn from mistakes and identify ways to improve the services you are providing, which can only be good for your business or your service. So I think it's safe to say there's a bit of a theme there, and it's very much dialogue, not dispute. So over the course of the last few months, we've been listening to what you've been saying to the new commissioner, and we're going to take all of that into account when we are thinking about how to best handle complaints in the future. And we really want to hear from you on that. We can only make positive changes if we hear about what works well and what doesn't. And that's something for data protection officers and your communities to share with us. We're going to share some of our stories, but it's really powerful if you can share yours too. More importantly, your great solutions. And as I sort of said at the start of my piece here, you are all really doing a really good job. We're only seeing perhaps the tip of the iceberg of some of the things that you're having to deal with, and we get that and we understand that, and actually we know that you're really committed to upholding your service user and customers' rights. So yeah, we're going to share our stories, but it's really powerful if you can share yours. And so that's something we look forward to going forward. It's often said that the ICO should have stronger powers to make change happen, but it's actually our view that the real superheroes out there are those that can make the real difference, and that's you in the data protection community. So I'd like to say again, thank you for the great work you're doing to continue resolving complaints, and in their literal thousands, as we've shown you. And thank you for listening. I'm going to hand over now to Graham, who's going to have some questions for us.
Thanks, Dal, and thanks for everyone for all the questions. I've been scrolling through as the other three have been talking to try and pick out the themes of the questions. I'm going to jump in with one that's been quite a common theme throughout on these questions, and I'll put this question to Dom if I can. It's about our approach and how we approach some complaints when we go straight to the data controllers with our assessments or our outcomes. And it's been summed up quite well in this question that says, why does the ICO reach a decision about a complaint without contacting the organisation concerned to seek their version of events? And other people have said, can the ICO not adapt a fact-finding exercise to ask the DCs their version before we write out to the data subject and the data controller?
Yeah, okay, it's a really good question, and it's a theme that we've seen a lot of, and I can completely understand the sort of concerns around that approach. To try and summarise it with a little bit of context, as you can see, we're receiving in the region of 40,000 complaints a year, in the midst of obviously a bit of a backlog that appeared during the pandemic. You know, we've had to recruit a lot of staff within the department in the last couple of years, and we've had to get through those volumes of complaints, as is our statutory obligations, within 3 months. And one of the key principles of data protection legislation is accountability. And this approach came about the principle that actually, if someone's complaining to us, sometimes it can be resolved. Sometimes they have put out that middle ground of going to the organisation and complaining further. And it was a way of identifying lots of complaints which perhaps could be resolved at that front end. I do, however, take on board the criticism around how that can feel, that perhaps we're pointing the finger and that we've not done a full fact-finding mission and things do come to us prematurely. And I'm sure that can be the case. There's a couple of things to say here, I think. I think the first one is, if you receive a letter like that, it's not us saying that we necessarily think that you are completely in the wrong and that we're not open to it. We're providing a view based off the information that's been provided to us on the complaint at that time. If there's information missing from that, or we've missed something, or the individual has missed something, we're more than happy to change that decision. It's not a legally binding decision. It's not a decision notice. It's just a view based on the information at the time that we've received the complaint. So if you pick up the phone to our case officer, that's the easiest way of quickly resolving that. I appreciate sometimes that can be difficult. And if you do have any problems, then, you know, there are other ways to get through to us. But then first and foremost, please contact the case officers. They're happy to help. They're happy to look at other information. But what we do find is in a lot of these cases, actually, they do get resolved. So it has been a success. So I appreciate sometimes it can perhaps feel like we're being a little bit harsh and we're pointing the finger, but we often find that on most complaints, we do have enough information to come to that assessment, is what we've found. And then the second point, as hopefully we've alluded to in the presentation, is we are hoping to move away from that approach. You know, the DP reforms are allowing that. We're moving to a place where we do understand sometimes that complainants may come to us a little bit prematurely, and that's what hopefully the DP reforms will set out. And as those sort of come through Parliament and as we have a better understanding of it, we are hoping to look to improve that process and make it a more accessible thing. But the key thing for us really is we want to hear from you. We understand that you're working with this on a day-to-day basis. We understand you're doing a good job, and we understand that there may be things that we're missing. So if you do get one of those letters from us, pick up the phone to the case officer. It's not saying that you're in the wrong, and it's not being recorded as necessarily a black mark against your organisation's name. It's very much it's just very much a way of us trying to process a large volume of complaints. And as I said, in the majority of those cases, we do actually come to the correct assessment.
Cheers, Dom. The next question is one that I think we can all relate to, and it's tricky customers or people that can be seen as wasting our time. So just a question to anyone on the panel there. Will the ICO produce guidance on the application of excessive requests for the DCs? And also, can you just give us your experiences with how you manage these difficult customers?
Do you want me to, Helen or Victoria, do you want to jump in?
Go on, Dom, you go.
Okay. So yeah, I think in terms of the guidance, I think that's probably something that we'll be looking at internally. I think the DP reforms are setting out some slight tweaks to that. I think first and foremost, in terms of how you look into, so in terms of the answer to that question, I think yes, I think we will look to issue guidance where we can. Obviously, we'll wait to see what the DP reforms exactly specify. It needs to go through Parliament. But yeah, and we are aware, obviously, that those customers and individuals do exist. And I think something that Kevin touched upon in the little video clip about, you know, requests being purpose blind, I think what you can take from that, what Kevin said, is, you know, we don't need to be blind to the purpose, and I think that's what we sometimes need to look at. And if you're going to apply manifestly excessive or manifestly unfounded, I think it's really important that you remove yourself from who the individual is, because actually what the legislation is saying is that the request itself needs to be excessive or unfounded. So our view really is, it's, you know, whether the nature of the request is excessive or unfounded, in the sense that are they excessive requests? Are they making lots and lots of requests? If it's a difficult customer who's made one request and you have lots of volumes of information on them, volume isn't a reason for it being excessive. It's not that individual's fault per se that you may be processing lots of personal data on them. So therefore, volume isn't a reason for it being excessive, and then being a difficult customer isn't a reason for them being excessive. It's purely on, you know, if they're making a request every single day, then that's probably excessive. And the same with the unfounded. You know, the unfounded, you would need evidence that they are doing it for they are doing it for a malicious purpose. They are doing it to disrupt you. We've had examples in the past where individuals have perhaps created Twitter campaigns saying, "Oh, ask this organisation for your information, because if you do, it will delay their processing and they'll have to put staff behind it." Something like that is really obvious that they're doing it to cause disruption. So in terms of the manifestly excessive unfounded, it's probably not the answer lots of you want to hear, but it's quite difficult to apply. And I think if you do have an individual that's, you know, particularly difficult, particularly persistent, and you're concerned about the best way to approach them, then again, if the complaint comes through, pick up the phone to the case officer and we can have that practical conversation where we ensure that we are upholding those individual rights, but also we're understanding the difficulties that you may be facing and whether there is further advice on that. I do appreciate that, you know, some individuals perhaps are looking to do this and it can be frustrating, but really you should be looking to provide as much as you can in terms of the response to request, rather than looking to find the first exemption where that applies. And I appreciate, I know that's probably not the easiest thing to do, but as I said, as far as we're concerned, pick up the phone to us, have that conversation with us, and we're happy to advise on those case-by-case basis.
I think we'll have time for just a very quick one. It goes back to right to the beginning of the presentation there, Don. What is the difference between a complaint and an inquiry? And this will be the last question, unfortunately.
Yeah. So the main difference is a complaint is where the individual has made it clear to the ICO that they are complaining that under Section 165 of the Data Protection Act that their rights, they believe their rights to have been infringed, and they are saying, "I think my rights have been infringed. Basically, can you look into it?" We have a complaints form on our website, which the majority of those complaints come through as. So it's where the individual has expressed that they think something has gone wrong and they want the ICO to provide an outcome. An inquiry is predominantly they're just emails that we receive from members of the public, where it might be something as straightforward as, "Can I access this information? Am I entitled to have my name didn't move from Google searches," or something like that. So it can be just a generic scope. So we receive around about 500, I think, emails a month for members of the public just asking us general questions about data protection, where it's not really clear if they're even referring to a particular organisation. So that's the key difference, is the complaint is when it's made very clear, "I am unhappy with this organisation because of X, Y, and Z." The advice, the inquiry cases are very much, I have a question about data protection, please can you answer it? And I think that probably concludes our time. I appreciate we will have had loads of questions and loads of comments. What we'll do is we'll spend some time after this going through them, and if we think it's necessary, then we may issue further responses. But obviously there's channels open to you to contact us. We've got an SME hub, so if you're from a smaller or medium enterprise, then we do have that helpline accessible to you. And hopefully there's other ways that you'll be able to contact us if we can't provide responses to all of those. And I'd finally like to say thank you for joining us on this ridiculously hot day. I hope I appreciate it's probably not the most comfortable setting for you to sit and listen to us talk about data protection complaints. So we do really appreciate you joining us. Our team, our communications team, would also like to thank you for taking your time to join us today virtually. And we will be sending out some feedback forms in the next couple of days. So if you could fill those in, that would be really appreciated, because we want to make sure that when we reach out to the wider data protection community that you are getting the best from it, as that's our role is fundamentally to support you guys that are doing that really good job. So thank you for joining us. And yeah, hopefully you can enjoy the weather, and hopefully it's not too hot, although it is.